It's the 4th of April. The year is 1995, and one small Tennessee town, along with its surrounding countryside, has become ground zero in a war between several smaller groups of interest and a number of SCP Foundation mobile task forces. Operatives of Task Forces Sigma-7, also known as Turn Riot at the Light, Upsilon 4, codenamed Please Don't Touch Me, and ETA 9, otherwise referred to as Mall Security, was dispatched to subdue the local residents following a reported conflict between 3 anomalous groups active in the area. The struggle between these groups of interest had escalated drastically. However, their primary weapons weren't exactly conventional in nature. Instead of fighting with firearms, these 3 groups of interest were deploying fungus against one another. This incident and the anomalous material involved would become known as SCP-1627, the Mushroom Wars. Less than 2 months prior, in a small secluded mountain town in Tennessee, things had been as quiet as ever. That was before townsfolk came into contact with what, at first, appeared to be some fairly common Amanita muscaria, also known as the fly agaric mushroom. These are easily identifiable by their typical red caps and white spots, possibly even one of the most recognizable species of toadstool, thanks to their depictions in popular culture. But unlike the aesthetically similar super mushrooms from the Super Mario franchise, fly agaric are anything but safe. It is not uncommon for children to end up in the hospital after eating them, attracted to them for their bright coloration and associations with pop culture. Usually, while they are poisonous and cause a variety of intense side effects when ingested, including vomiting, internal bleeding, blindness, and even hallucinations, death caused by poisoning with fly agaric is rare. What were far rarer, though, were the side effects of direct contact with this new, anomalous strain of fly agaric mushroom, discovered accidentally by the Tennessee locals in 1995. The unusual happenings had started earlier that year, when a group of individuals unfamiliar to the townsfolk marched their way into the town square unexpectedly on the evening of the 14th of February at exactly 8 o'clock that night. When questioned by locals, the group quickly identified themselves as the Cult of the New, a title that meant little to the unsuspecting citizens. Needless to say, the arrival of a brazen and strange cult in their normally safe and quiet home was unsettling enough. But what followed was worse, much worse. Members of the Cult of the New produced samples of the strange mushrooms, seemingly having harvested them personally. They then used SCP-1627 to conduct a strange ritual, revealing the anomalous properties of this fungus when brought into direct contact with human beings. Using members of their own number as willing participants, the Cult of the New had several amongst them ingest the mushrooms. Doing so normally would have resulted in a person experiencing the non-anomalous side effects of fly agaric poisoning. However, eating SCP-1627 under specific criteria led to something far stranger. The anomalous strain of mushroom needed to first come into contact with human blood, then be eaten by a human subject. Then, if ingested while in the absence of direct sunlight, the person eating the fungus would find their body becoming rapidly transfigured. By completing the aforementioned steps using their own blood, crucially, members of the Cult of the New were transformed into instances of what would later become known as SCP-1627-A. Upon completing their transformation process, these newly birthed instances of SCP-1627-A would initially appear to still be human. However, any internal or external injuries or other forms of damage to their bodies would be completely healed upon completion of the fungal ritual. Everything from tissue and nerve damage to bacterial or viral infections, even cancers, could be cured by ingesting SCP-1627 in combination with one's own blood. The only conditions unaffected by the transformation would be congenital genetic mutations passed down from relatives. SCP-1627-A subjects weren't just granted a clear bill of health in terms of any prior illnesses and injuries, but a near-permanent resistance against any future damage too. They could resist infection by pathogens of all descriptions, as well as being able to survive for extended periods of time without the need for food or water, functioning entirely normally without succumbing to dehydration or starvation. While they appeared to retain their original humanoid form and features, These subjects could be distinguished from the other members of the Cult of the New by the faint white glow that was emanating from within their bodies. This glow would only be noticeable in areas with an illumination of no more than 100 lumens, curiously similar to the bioluminescence of some mushroom species. As the more unlucky residents of the secluded Tennessee town would soon come to learn, direct skin contact with a subject that had become an SCP-1627-A instance was inevitably fatal. Initially, being touched by one of these fungal infections would seem to heal any injuries and infections that were present in a non-anomalous person. However, over a period of around 2 weeks following contact, the touched person would experience a rapid decline in their cells' ability to divide and grow. This would cause their body to quickly shut down until they died from similar natural causes to those associated with old age. Meanwhile, the SCP-1627-A that came into contact with the unfortunate individual would appear rejuvenated, as this process is apparently the way in which they feed, harvesting nourishment from their victims. When the Cult of the New entered the town square, they weren't just creating instances of SCP-1617-A though. Completing the ritual steps, but using someone else's blood instead of their own, would result in subjects becoming instances of SCP-1627-B. Unlike the other potential fungal mutation, subjects that become SCP-1627-B after transformation sport a uniformly dark pigmentation across their entire bodies, with the exception of 2 points of light. These are located on the subject's upper half and seem to function as eyes. It can be hard to determine though, as these subjects take on a more formless shape when stationary and appear to be semi-solid in a state between running liquid and viscous matter. Despite appearing less humanoid than their SCP-1627-A counterparts, SCP-1627-B instances are still sentient and sapient and remain capable of vocalizations. However, most subjects that undergo this transformation process do not retain their original personalities afterwards. Instead, they seem to adopt far more predatory behavior, often attacking and killing their prey through means of suffocation. Using their semi-solid state, SCP-1627-B instances will forcefully enter the respiratory tract of their victims, typically via the nose, mouth, or a combination of both simultaneously. Blocking these essential airways causes an agonizing death for their target, after which point SCP-1627-B subjects will continue to enter the victim's corpse. Once inside, the viscous fungal mutation will consume a person's cardiovascular system, their nervous system, and in cases where these are present in a body, the reproductive system too. Once the key internal systems and organs of their prey have been devoured, the SCP-1627-B instance will excrete preservatives into the remaining tissues in order to prevent the remainder of the corpse from decaying. This is because, unnervingly, even after having eaten what's inside a person, the fungus still has a use for them. SCP-1627-B will inhabit human corpses in order to infiltrate populated areas, blending in with the locals and normally living amongst other SCP-1627-B organisms. They are typically found sticking to groups of 3 members. However, some have been found in groups as large as 7, and some even living alone. Piloting these bodies, where SCP-1627-B cannot retain a consistently solid humanoid form outside, they can remain inside a host corpse indefinitely. 2 possible mutations resulting from a ritual with an anomalous mushroom, one remaining humanoid in shape, draining people's cells for nourishment, the other a formless mass that needs to occupy human bodies as vessels to survive. Instances of both SCP-1627-A and SCP-1627-B were created by the Cult of the New, set to proclamations of power and evolution from the cult's members. The townsfolk, likely terrified at the sudden transformations they'd witnessed, became enraged and a riot broke out amongst the gathered crowd. This resulted in a massacre, wherein those living in the town trying to defend their homes quickly learned that SCP-1627-A and SCP-1627-B instances were invulnerable to physical damage. Bullets ripped right through them, only for wounds to seal shut in seconds. Bludgeoning might have taken chunks out of their fungal flesh, only for it to rapidly regrow in time for a counterattack. The fighting lasted the entire night, leading to the death of the entire cult and several civilians. but the war was far from over. The following day, after the incident in the town square, the remaining townsfolk splintered off into 3 factions, taking control of various areas within the town. The largest group was the Daylight Huntsmen, who aligned themselves with instances of SCP-1627-A. It seemed that without the Cult of the New keeping them in line, the differing SCP-1627 mutations weren't exactly on the most amicable of terms. So the Daylight Huntsmen outfitted themselves with gas masks and full-body outfits in order to protect themselves from SCP-1627-B's hunting methods. They became extremely hostile to anyone they didn't recognize as a part of their number, given that any person could be an instance of SCP-1627-B piloting a corpse. This meant that beyond the huntsmen who were organized, hardly anyone else was permitted to join. The Daylight Huntsmen set about destroying communications equipment, including phones, and shutting down access to the internet. They were intent on stopping the spread of SCP-1627-Bs beyond the confines of the town. When they encountered the more humanoid SCP-1627-As, however, the Huntsmen invited these fungal mutants to join their ranks, being careful not to touch them. Over the course of the subsequent 2 months, it was learned that both SCP-1627-As and SCP-1627-Bs would become susceptible to starvation after 3 weeks if they did not receive their required nutrition. In order to keep the SCP-1627-A instances in their ranks alive, the Daylight Huntsmen would capture members of another group by barging into random houses in search of them, or other SCP-1627-B instances. The people they found were then used to feed SCP-1627-As by the Huntsmen, those who weren't executed via incineration at the town's crematorium. The main group opposing and targeting the Daylight Huntsmen referred to themselves as the Brotherhood of the Night. Believing that SCP-1627-Bs were the next step in human evolution, this group made it their express purpose to spread further instances of these fungal mutations. The Brotherhood's members would assist SCP-1627-B instances in finding people to feed on and allowing them to inhabit their corpses. Many of the Brotherhood of the Night's number were townsfolk who were displeased with the militia-like operations of the Daylight Huntsmen and attempted to become more reclusive in order to avoid engaging with the opposing force. There were an additional number of satellite cultist groups that formed during the ensuing months, principal among them being referred to as the Enders. The Daylight Hunters tended to ignore these cultists, and relations between them and the Brotherhood of the Night were non-existent. The Enders formed their own religious beliefs surrounding SCP-1627-A and SCP-1627-B, believing that each were manifestations of good and evil, respectively. The Enders' core principles stated that they needed to maintain a balance between the 2 varieties of fungal mutation, as preparation for what they referred to as the Shatter. The cult believed that these anomalous mushroom mutants were a sign from the universe that the end times were coming, and that they would be caused by extremes. Often holding gatherings in private residences, members of the Enders cult preached that their salvation would come from remaining neutral, and reviled the extremes of either good or bad in equal measure. They invited the uninitiated to join their cult, sending speakers known as equalizers to converse with surviving townsfolk, in order to convince them that the Enders would provide safety from SCP-1627 entities as they prepared for the Shatter. Tensions between these 3 groups eventually erupted, and by the time the SCP Foundation dispatched its mobile task forces Sigma-7, Upsilon-4, and Eta-9 to the area, the town had been swept up into a full-blown conflict. The Daylight Huntsmen had become increasingly paranoid of the threat of SCP-1627-B, turning on each other as the key figures organizing the militia started to believe that they had been infiltrated by the anomalous fungal entities. Their internal structure eroded, with betrayal between members hindering their efforts to mobilize. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of the Night launched a massive attack wherein they released 20 instances of SCP-1627-B into the town. They managed to keep these mutants hidden from the Huntsmen, and were now letting them loose to hunt freely. At the same time, the Brotherhood's members also began feeding SCP-1627 mushrooms to people at random, each one having been covered in blood in order to spawn a new SCP-1627-B instance. The Enders were also taking radical action, and begun killing other townsfolk indiscriminately, using various inventive methods that didn't involve direct contact. At some point, the apocalyptic cult had come to the conclusion that killing wasn't taking either side, but was rather a neutral action. Some considered it justified, describing the act of taking a life as able to be both merciful and malicious. Killing at random, some enders realized, would also kill all the remaining people in the town, or all of the SCP-1627 entities, thus allowing it to fall in the middle, aligned with their own warped belief system. When the SCP Foundation's operatives arrived, Anomalous Outbreak Protocol Row 05 was enacted, and a majority of the townsfolk were subdued. Members of each of the three major factions that had formed were taken in for questioning, while surviving instances of SCP-1627-A and SCP-1627-B were rounded up and placed in containment. With the town placed under quarantine, Class A amnestics were used to wipe the memories of all involved, and any information about the three factions or the events that had taken place in the town were gathered up by the Foundation. As far as anyone would ever know, the so-called Mushroom Wars never happened. But in a 50-kilometer squared area of woodland not far from the town, SCP-1627 continues to grow. Now go check out SCP-407, The Song of Genesis, and SCP-354, The Red Pool, for more.